Hi.
Hi.
Before we get started on today's episode, just want to acknowledge the 2 earthquakes that happened in Venezuela last week and the huge amount of devastation that the country is experiencing, which matters a lot to, I think, a lot of people because the vast amount of suffering and help that Venezuela needs right now. And also, I have family there. Luis's family lives there. They're all thankfully safe, but a lot of people are not. Mm-hmm. So we are going to link resources to donate to and to think about helping out in the show notes. So just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that. Mm-hmm. Now on to our episode this week. We're told not to be too sensitive. We praise people who have thick skin. We treat sensitivity like something to outgrow, and we've been conditioned to think of the best people as those who brush things off easily. But what if us thinking of sensitivity as a weakness is all wrong?
This is our mini-series, and we called them Weeds, where we focus on the qualities, emotions, and experiences that we tend to dismiss, avoid, or label as liabilities, without stopping to ask whether they might actually serve a purpose.
And this is our podcast, Hold That Thought. In a world that moves too fast to process, Hold That Thought puts words to the thoughts and contradictions you carry, but rarely hear spoken out loud. Every episode, we explore the ideas, relationships, and invisible forces shaping how people move through the world, and why certain experiences change us more deeply than others.
Today, we're exploring sensitivity, not as a flaw to overcome, but as a way of relating to the world. We'll look at why psychologists are starting to look at sensitivity less as vulnerability and more as responsiveness, why evolution may have preserved it, and what we lose when we mistake feeling for fragility.
So whether you've been told you're too sensitive or whether you've tried your whole life to have thicker skin, today we're asking one simple question. What if sensitivity isn't about feeling too much? What if it's just about responding differently? Hold that thought. Hi, Becky.
Hey, mama.
What's up, my girl?
I mean, we both have been traveling for the past 2.5 weeks. So yesterday, Monday, was a bit of a resettling, letting the dust fall. And today was the first day where I actually felt like a functioning person again. Yeah. Lucky us. And it's nice to be home.
Completely agree. I had such a homecoming feeling flying back in. We had the most special weekend celebrating 2 of our best friends in a beautiful, insanely fun wedding in the south of France. The whole weekend, I kept just pinching myself and saying, like, this is something I won't have again. Yeah. We were staying in this chateau, or a lot of the guests were, and it was the type of place that brought me back to childhood and what it would have felt like to play make-believe in that place. And I just kept thinking, and it was funny, it clearly was prompting some sort of playfulness in me, like wanting to run around the rooms and either play hide and seek or pretend to be in Downton Abbey time, I kept saying, and listeners' ears.
Lady Grantham. Maybe the first morning we were there and I was definitely slower moving and you came to get me and then were this like little pet at my side, like biting at my heels, like trying to get me to move faster. You're like, I want to tour the grounds.
I literally
was like, coffee.
It was so fun. And just, I mean, our friends threw a magical party and it was so representative of their love and they're amazing and made everyone feel so special. They had handwritten notes for every single person at their seating.
Yeah. Something I loved was that the day after the ceremony was on a Friday, and the day after was Nell's 30th birthday, and we had a pool party and a DJ there that they loved. And I didn't know really what to expect. I don't think I've ever gone to a pool party like that. It's like, it was so fun to drink Aperol Spritz and pina coladas, my favorite drink ever, in a pool. We were playing with her nieces who we were obsessed with.
Yeah.
The best weather, the best music. We were having such fun chats with people and like new friends we'd made, and I had the best time.
Yeah. I have a clear memory of you going, I'm going to go get myself a virgin pina colada. Come back and you have the pina colada. And I was like, oh, you were able to make it virgin? You were like, nope.
Nope.
Not an option.
Took a bullet. Yeah, that was delicious.
So fun.
So today we're talking about sensitivity. And as we talked about in the intro, the goal with this batch of episodes is that we're examining the things that we've labeled in our lives as weeds. So things we want to extract and like throw out to see what actual purpose lies beneath and how they might have been misunderstood. You suggested sensitivity, and I think that is something that really resonates with me as someone who is super sensitive. I think it was confusing to grow up as a really sensitive child because it felt like I was a live wire, like a bleeding heart. Everything hit me to a degree that it seemed that others were not affected. Yeah, it's just confusing when you don't have language for it, don't really understand mental health or how we're all different. So I just had a really fun time researching this, and it makes me excited that other people could listen to this and feel less alone or find the superpower in their sensitivity.
Yeah, I love that. To give a concrete definition of what we're talking about here, because I think it's a word that's used to our point of the weeds element. stop being so sensitive. Like,
Yeah.
there's an element of wanting to be able to make fun of your own self and laugh at yourself. And we hear don't be sensitive as this like bantered thing around of ways in which someone's too touchy and is too reactive.
Yeah. It was just a joke.
Yeah, exactly. And that's an element of what we're talking about. But what we're really talking about here is something deeper.
Yeah.
Sensory processing sensitivity is an individual difference that captures the extent to which someone shows heightened emotional reactivity to and then increased cognitive processing of their environment. So that is taken very clinically from research on this heightened sensitivity, sensory processing sensitivity. So in more layman's words, it's essentially like a more intense emotional response or deeper processing of your emotional surroundings and the emotional or environmental subtleties around you. And that can create often deeper emotional responses to that heightened sensitivity of the environment.
Like you're taking in more data than the average Joe.
Yeah. I think we touched on this, but when I was doing some of my research, that emotional responsiveness in our culture, emotional is often tied to negative emotions. Like sadness, anxiety, anger, like stop being so emotional. And sensitivity is actually a strong responsiveness to the entire spectrum of emotions. So it isn't just that someone is emotionally responsive to the negative. We'll get to this when we talk a little bit about the power of it, but it's also that they are emotionally responsive to positive emotions.
Yeah.
And I think it just goes to show it's interesting how our culture is so, and I think often human emotions are so highly attuned to the negative. It's the way our brains are wired predisposed is to latch on to the negative emotions and remember them more than the positive.
Yeah.
And societally as well. Emotional has become so tied to the negative side of that spectrum. And that I think is part of the reason why sensitivity has this negative connotation.
Yeah.
When you think about who actually is highly sensitive, you know, you're talking about you experienced yourself as a highly sensitive child and adult.
Yeah.
Based on research, only roughly 30% of all people score highly for sensitivity. And we'll get to what that score is. And I find that surprising.
Interesting that you said the word only 30% because to me, it feels like that's a lot of the whole population.
I don't know. Maybe it's because I've never done one of the tests, which maybe this is an opportunity to just say really quickly who the Aarons were.
Yeah.
Dr. Elaine Aron. And were they married?
I think so. Arthur.
And Arthur Aron were some of the earliest behavioral and psychological researchers on sensitivity, trying to quantify sensitivity in highly sensitive people. They were the authors of The Highly Sensitive Person, and they created this tool by which to test whether someone is highly sensitive called the HSP scale. And it's 27 statements rated on a 1 to 7 scale, 1 being not at all, 7 being definitely extremely. And the higher your total number based on all the statements, which there's things like, are you easily overwhelmed by strong sensory input? Or do you need to kind of go take yourself away on busy days? Reading those, I'm like, yes and yes. But I've never taken the HSP, so I don't know where I fall on the scale. But I guess maybe the only 30% might have been my way of saying I only know going through the world as a sensitive person.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I would call myself clinically sensitive. And then I just caught myself because it's not a clinical condition. It's not something like anxiety. It's not, exactly, depression. It is a inherited temperament.
Yeah.
And when the Aarons did their studies, they originally thought only 15 to 20% of the population was highly sensitive. And over the past 20 plus years of additional research, that number has grown. Right. Not just from them, but research across many different domains.
Yeah. I saw this timepiece focused just on sensitivity as a strength and liked this quote from it. Sensitive people are wired at a brain level to process information more deeply than others do. That includes sensory input, like noticing the texture of a fabric, emotional input, reading social cues, and ideas, spending a longer time thinking things through and making more connections between concepts. If you're sensitive, this deep processing changes the way you see the world. You probably notice what others miss, think, and feel deeply, and have a vivid inner life. You probably also get overstimulated in situations that don't bother anyone else. And I thought that was such a healthy reframe of it. And some of that can sound comorbid with like autism spectrum disorder, or there's like an auditory processing diagnosis in the DSM. And I was seeing that it exists on a spectrum. There was a paper, the title was Dandelions, Tulips, and Orchids. It had a subtitle, but that has become one of the central metaphors in developmental psychology.
Yeah.
And in that paper, the researchers said environmental sensitivity is a continuous and normally distributed trait. So essentially, sensitivity isn't something that you have or don't have. It's distributed across the population and you exist somewhere on a spectrum. And people fall into 3 distinct sensitive groups. This is where we get the dandelions, tulips, and orchids. Dandelions thrive almost anywhere. Tulips are moderately sensitive, and orchids are most affected by both adversity and support. So
again, that both positive, negative. Yeah.
And I have some more on that. That's really interesting. But notice that the metaphor never says like orchids are weak. It just says that they're more affected by the conditions that they're planted in.
Something you had just said about how it sounds a little bit like elements of other spectrums we know, like autism spectrum disorder. I was listening to a few interviews with Dr. Erin and her perspective, and I thought this was really interesting, was like, don't over index too much on anything that sounds too much like sensitivity. Like it can exist on its own. And her feeling was, I wouldn't expect someone who's on the autism spectrum to be sensitive because sensitivity, in the way she's conceptualized so much of her research, is picking up on minute cues, social cues, for example, that someone who is on the autism spectrum might not. But not to criticize her work, but there is a lot more work that has been done about trying to find subtypes of HSP that I think could feel maybe more resonant to a broader swath of people than just like being highly attuned to social interactions, which I feel like that's probably one of the ways I'm most sensitive, is like, I think I am constantly kind of scanning for how people are reacting to social situations.
Yeah, like hypervigilance.
Yeah. And I think that is only one type. That's more of like the super sensors, what they call it. Like you pick up on minute details in the environment and probably pretty aware of subtleties in that environment. There are more. There's the super feeler, like someone who is crying easily or can feel super emotionally drained or who is intensely affected by human connection. There's the aesthetic feeler, so someone who feels great inspiration or transcendence when they're working or seeing or feeling music, art, beauty in the natural surroundings or otherwise. And so that's someone who might feel or be prone to a lot of creativity, which we'll get to in a little bit when we talk about the benefits. You'd mentioned even like the feeler being very attuned to touch. I don't know. I just think it was interesting because it just goes to show that what we're talking about is this trait that sits on top of and might have some correlation with, but not causation with a lot of other human emotions and experiences. And I think it's easy because we've been trained to think of it as bad to label it alongside things like anxiety, which also we will one day do, we call them weeds on it. Also has this like almost negative connotation with it.
Yeah. Other research I saw that I found really compelling was on differential susceptibility. So psychologists for a long time viewed sensitivity through what's called the diathesis stress model. The idea was that if life is hard, sensitive people struggle more.
Right.
Jay Belsky and Michael Pluis proposed a different idea, which was differential susceptibility. So highly sensitive people are not just more vulnerable, but also disproportionately susceptible to the beneficial effects of supportive and enriching experiences. So the same person who is disproportionately affected by criticism, instability, or stress may also benefit more than others from love, support, therapy, or positive relationships. So what their research says is essentially that sensitivity isn't simply a risk factor, but it represents a greater openness to experience. They frame sensitivity as an evolved difference in responsiveness, not as simply a defect.
Evolved, like speaking to the fact that it has this beneficial element to our existence.
This is a quote. Evolutionary biological reasoning suggests that individuals should be differentially susceptible to environmental influences. So it makes sense, they're claiming, that there would be variation in terms of our evolution. And to the point that I think you made, at least when we were starting to talk about this topic, if sensitivity were only a disadvantage, then evolution would have selected against it, and we wouldn't find it as prominent as it is, 30%, in our present day. I was seeing interesting dialogue around the fact that like groups benefit not only from having these explorers and adventurers and those who are like impervious to that which would make them respond sensitively, but we also need the cautious observers and the ones who do feel and like perceive. The evolutionary argument behind differential susceptibility, which I just talked about, suggests that different temperaments are adaptive in different environments. And a tribe doesn't only, they say, need explorers, it also needs people who can notice subtle changes, who hear the branch snap first, who detect tension before conflict, or notice a sick child before everyone else does. And so sensitivity may persist because it fills a different ecological role, not because everyone should have the same level of it. And that gets again to the spectrum. It behooves us as a quote unquote tribe to have variations so that people are filling different roles.
Yeah, I like that.
And have different strengths and then weaknesses or growing edges.
That makes sense. When you say that though, I think that makes total sense. And there are a lot of sensitive adventurers, right? Like there are a lot of non-sensitive stay-behinders maybe.
Yeah.
And
that's a great point.
Just to state the obvious, we're talking in like broad swaths here. The evolutionary psychology behind sensitivity was further ahead than the genetics of it.
Ooh.
But more and more, they've been doing a lot more actual genetics testing to figure out what that gene might look like for sensitivity, which I think is really interesting because often what you and I are talking about here in terms of emotion hasn't had that ability to have that same one-to-one genetic understanding. And when we think about how something is passed on and evolutionarily grows through a gene pool, there's deeper understanding of the gene that actually works with sensitivity. And I should say this is like very much on the cusp and is really only focused on one allele. Allele is a version of a gene.
God, that triggers me back to bio.
That makes me happy, but that makes you scared.
It makes me scared and sad.
I'll make this really easy. So there is a gene called the serotonin transporter gene. Has a very long 6 letters, 1 number. Science name. No need. And it shows that individuals with the short version of this gene have a lower expression of it. That makes sense. AKA, there's less of the protein that gene encodes for in their body. Less of this protein makes them more sensitive to their environment. So there's that sensitivity. They feel stress more intensely. They might also, to your point earlier, thrive more in positive environments. They might, respond better to positive reinforcement. So this is crucial. This is kind of showing that there might be a gene that is tied to or correlated with being a highly sensitive person. This gene codes for a protein that essentially goes in and cleans up or is like the vacuum for serotonin, which you might be thinking, SSRIs, serotonin selective
serotonin reuptake inhibitors.
Thank you. And I was too, because I was thinking, okay, well, a shorter version of this allele means less expression of the protein, means fewer of these serotonin vacuumers.
Right.
The serotonin sits in the gap between the brain cells for longer in your brain, your neurons, and it becomes kind of this like traffic jam. And your brain's alarm system becomes more overactive. Okay. And this means you might be more alert to threats, easily overwhelmed by stress, all the things that we've been talking about when it comes to being sensitive. The longer allele version is more like more vacuums, clearing serotonin quickly and is more kind of stable, one could say. There's more research needed on, we have genes for dopamine and think about the vast number of neurotransmitters we have. And so there's really only been a lot of good substantiated research on this particular gene expression. We're not on serotonin, but this research on genetic variation and types of sensitivities is really exciting. And the field is really excited about what it opens up. I thought this was really interesting, but I also was really curious because how is it that someone who is anxious might be on an SSRI, which also the goal is to keep the serotonin from being uptaken in the brain, right? And if that's the problem of this short allele, how would an SSRI not cause more sensitivity and therefore more anxiety? And frankly, I was having a hard time finding a good answer to that. One bit of research I found, though, did show that people that have that longer rare version of the gene, and therefore that is the allele that is not associated with sensitivity, often actually respond better to SSRIs than someone who might have that shorter allele. It's a very cutting edge part of the research, but I think the mapping of sensitivity to gene expression is really interesting. But I'm still confused. Doesn't that like not make sense? But I guess maybe also to the point that sensitivity doesn't equal anxiety.
Yeah, and I think so much goes into the way that your body or brain processes a drug that we can't narrow it probably that closely.
Yes.
Like correlation versus causation, there's so much going into that reaction.
Makes me want to do more research, which is cool.
Hell yeah, girl. I was really excited to see the strengths of highly sensitive people or sensitive people in general discussed in concrete terms. One of those was creativity. What I was seeing in the research and in the article, there was another article from Time, was that sensitive people tend to be deep thinkers who spend more time and energy turning problems over in their heads and end up seeing more possibilities and solutions. This is a quote. Many of our greatest thinkers and scientists throughout history have been sensitive people, including Charles Darwin, who was not only creative, but contemplative, humble, conscientious, and full of strong emotions, the model of a sensitive person. Did you see anything about creativity?
I saw a similar thing to you. I think it is that rich inner life piece, which I kind of hate those words because it implies that people who aren't sensitive don't have rich inner life.
Yeah.
But that is, so I don't actually know if I want to include that.
Well, I think when I hear that, I'm like, yeah, it could be interpreted that way. And also like the people who have
the chatty
demons
mind
going on. Yeah. Like it's nice. It's like throwing them a bone, a meaningful bone that, you know, is grounded in truth, but it is like a helpful reframe. And I think that's okay. That maybe is present if you turn it on its head, but it's not necessarily like implicit.
Yeah. No need to think if you're like, I actually wouldn't character myself as a sensitive person. I don't know why I have this perception that everyone listening is going to be like, yeah, hell yeah, I'm sensitive.
Yeah.
And maybe we should write in the comments if you feel like you're sensitive, even
Guys,
if you wouldn't.
In the comments more. I'm dying
to know your thoughts. I don't know why I have this perspective that I would be shocked if most of our listeners didn't think, yeah, I'm sensitive. Maybe it's just because in the way that we're talking about it now in this episode. And I know that only 30% of people might actually score high on the highly sensitive person scale. But all of the elements of sensitivity that we're talking about, to your point, from dandelion to orchid, we can all relate to some element of these feelings. The highly sensitive, how hard it can be to be an orchid in the society that has said sensitivity is bad, workplaces aren't made up for sensitive people, all those things. Like,
I mean, I know
if we'd focus most of our episode on that, maybe people would be like, wait, I'm not an orchid.
No, I would say I'm an orchid, or at least like used to be I'm a recovering orchid growing into a tulip. But I definitely know that there are people listening who are more tulips than dandelions.
What do you think I am? An orchid.
I think, well, my instinct would have been to say orchid, like
a torchid.
A torchid. Yeah.
Hey, we're just two torchids. Yeah, I do. I think the element we were talking about in the creativity also is like someone who's very susceptible, like highly susceptible to things in their surroundings, are going to see details that others might not see.
Yeah.
This is not where my sensitivity is. I'm not seeing like details in the trees that others are not. Yeah. But that could help them with certain types of art, for example. Yeah. It would be so fun to see some of this research on like all the different types of sensitivity and how it maps onto different skills. And I think that's not quite there. Dr. Aaron was saying, I'm so excited for the genetic research to get further, and then would love to see some of that start to map onto the types, like more flavors of sensitivity. Yeah. And I talked a little bit about those in the buckets, but it would just be cool to see. Another benefit I was thinking, I know you saw this too, was the boost effect. Yeah. And you talked about that a little bit in terms of like highly sensitive people can also get the boost out of the positive things where others can't. But what else were you seeing on that?
This is a quote I liked. For example, a 2022 study looked at hundreds of couples at risk of divorce. The couples had been given a relationship training to improve their marriages, and at a glance, it seemed to help. The couples who received it were more likely to stay together. But when researchers gave the subjects personality tests, they found that it was the sensitive people who were most likely to use the training to save their marriages. Not only that, the couples where at least one person was sensitive reported an improvement in relationship quality overall. They became happier with each other. Other couples got no such benefit. And it also apparently was demonstrated in the research over and over that it's not just in the context of the relationships that sensitive people are supercharged by any form of training or support.
Mm-hmm.
Really interesting. Like
So cool.
implementation is a skill,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, in that sense.
Yeah. And when we're talking here, this research very clearly said genetic sensitivity. So they mapped this onto those short allele individuals. So I just, again, think it's interesting.
I also was seeing decision-making abilities highlighted. In studies involving both humans and monkeys, the subjects who are sensitive based on having gene variants associated with sensitivity, #allele, tend to outperform. I think the last time my lips said that word was in
Were you like 10?
9th grade.
Yeah. Were you 10?
Tend to outperform others on a variety of cognitive tasks, particularly those that require noticing patterns and using them to predict outcomes and make smart decisions. I wonder if that's why I'm good at set. Like pattern recognition has always been something that yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. Becky, you're so annoying to play set with. Becky brought her travel set to France.
We didn't play.
No, I know. And Becky was like, can we play with this new group of people that I didn't know very well? And I was like, I'm not playing set with you because then I'm just going to be the sore loser in these group of people that don't know me very well.
Right.
Yes. And a similar thing, it's been said that highly sensitive people make very good gamblers because of that decision-making capability. The article I read was like, they don't want to lose and they do want to live. I'm like, okay, well, everyone doesn't want to lose and do want to live.
Actually, that links well to the part talking about decision-making ability, also connected it to evolutionary advantage. In a 2008 computer simulation of natural selection, creatures who spent more resources considering their options and comparing them to past results, as sensitive people do, came out ahead long-term compared to less sensitive creatures. They amassed more resources over time and out-survived others. Pretty cool.
Survival.
The last bit I do want to add is that I saw this research on emotional granularity that was done by Lisa Feldman Barrett. She is a professor of psychology at Northeastern University and has appointments at Mass General and Harvard Medical School. She also wrote a book, How Emotions Are Made: The Secret Life of the Brain. And she talked a lot about how people who notice emotional nuance often regulate their emotions over time better than those who don't notice emotional nuance.
Is that because they can recognize emotional nuance in others and themselves better?
Yes, and their lexicon is bigger. So I'll give some helpful quotes because I think she says it beautifully. It's a big understatement to say that if the only emotion concepts you recognize are me feel good and me feel bad, you're not going to be very emotionally intelligent. I see red, blue, and green. An interior decorator sees periwinkle, salmon, sage, magenta, and cyan. And that is only one of the many reasons you don't want me decorating your house, she says. The more time you take to distinguish the emotions you feel, to recognize them as distinct and different, the more emotionally intelligent you will become. This is called emotional granularity. The more concepts you know, the more flexibility your brain can guess at might cause the sense data from your body in a given situation. So if I were to rephrase that, it would be like, if you know that you could be feeling sadness, melancholy, homesickness, I'm getting a little abstract here, but all these different flavors of sadness as like the overarching emotion, less granular, then your brain has more data to pull on when it experiences physical manifestations of sadness. She says, concepts help you understand emotions after they have emerged, sure, but they are also a key ingredient of constructing emotions in the first place. Emotions don't happen to you. They are made by your brain as you need them. They are not built into your brain at birth. They are built by your brain using the emotion concepts that you have learned. Using emotion concepts, your brain runs your body budget by predicting the causes of upcoming events in your body in a way that is linked to the situation that you are in for the purposes of acting in a particular way. So ultimately, concepts are tools for making emotion. Okay, this part might clarify whatever flowery language felt confusing there.
No, but that was really cool.
This is one aspect of free will that few people talk about. You can broaden your experiences today to predict differently tomorrow. Effective control over your behavior requires that you broaden the horizon of time. Having control of your actions isn't only about avoiding certain actions in the heat of a moment. It's also about seeding your brain to have more flexibility in constructing your predictions before the heat of the moment. Okay, and hearing that, what do you understand? What's your takeaway?
It's interesting. But my thoughts are kind of like scattered because it was just a lot. Like what I'm thinking is like our brains are built for emotion.
Yes.
There are certain emotions that are universal. But I think what's really interesting there is that emotions or how our body and brain experiences them, we're not born with emotion. We're born with maybe like hunger as a child, need for safety and warmth. And as we build up more and more experiences, like pretty early on, we start to feel some emotional depth.
Yeah.
But it's not a given what that emotional depth will look like what the spectrum of color will look like.
Yeah.
It made me think back to our language episode where we talked about how having language for something changes the way you experience the world.
Yes.
It feels like the kind of brain body equivalent of that. Like you have to have had something go in to then have it come back out in your expression.
It's like if it's not a tool in your toolbox, there's nothing for the brain to grab at. Like it's not going to find that until it knows it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it makes me also think how exhausting it must be as a young child feeling all of these emotions for the first time.
True.
And then this ties to actually what I wanted to wrap up with, which is that to tell people it's not okay to be sensitive. And I think we could talk about the fact that like historically the male gender has been told it's important to not be sensitive, to be strong. And women have been given a broader freedom to be sensitive, even as historically also that has been treated weaponized. Yeah. If you're trying to stunt that sensitivity, are you not letting your brain is your brain just automatically taking in the emotions, but then you're stunting yourself from feeling it?
Yeah. Or
is it changing? I don't have the answer to this. Is it changing the way you intake emotion if you're not allowed to feel, not you're allowing yourself to feel that spectrum at the outset?
Yeah. I mean, kind of to what that research was talking about, like if your brain knows that even if it gets in there, you're not going to store it away in that nuanced, granularity sense, then it's not going to prioritize that data. Yeah. So I think you're right in that instinct, or the question at least, and my answer to it would be, I would think so. Like I think what is condoned or sanctioned is definitely a filter on what is intaken in the first place. Yeah. Because it's one thing for it to go in, but for it to be processed is another.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, from one Torkid to another.
Yeah. Torkids, rise.
Torkids unite. I love you.
I love you.
Bye. Thank you, Phoebe Fry, for this episode's music.
And thank you, Emily Kiernan, for the beautiful cover art.
If you like this episode, please like, share, and leave a comment. And we'll see you next week.